it. So
yeah.
I think I will hand over to you, and you can take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Let me share my screen here so that I hope that's visible now to everyone. So what I want to talk about, or maybe, or the topic of my little intervention today is the learner's journey, which is storytelling as a design principle to create powerful learning experiences. It's not storytelling as a methodology to achieve specific insights, or to use it basically as case studies or as experiential learning insights, but as a design principle. And I'll talk later a little bit about more why I make this distinction very much, but maybe a little bit more about also who I am. My name is Bastian Küntzel. I live in Wrocław in Poland for 11 years now already, and I have a little one-man shop that's called Incontro, where I facilitate learning at the intersection of culture, communication, and management. So I run a lot of intercultural trainings, but I also work with institutions like UNESCO or UNV or UNFPA or different universities as well, where I teach about intercultural communication, or I help them design learning journeys, essentially, in the sense of conferences or team retreats or leadership development, many different things. But what runs through all of it is that it's always very people-centric, very participatory, and somehow brings together the ideas of what culture is and how human perceptions influence how we see the world, etc. But the topic of this input now is the learner's journey, and I think what's important to have kind of as a baseline understanding in that is the two ways kind of how we are in the world. And you might know this Nobel Prize winning economist and psychologist Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. It's very good. And he recently gave another of his insights away, and that is that there's two senses of self in a way: an experiencing self and a remembering self. And the experiencing self is the one that takes in all the stimuli of the world and kind of processes it and does stuff with it in the brain. But then the remembering self is the one that kind of makes sense of everything that we take in through our eyes or ears or our skin or tongue or all other sensual organs that we carry around with us. And the remembering self is a storyteller. And I think this is a really crucial part in us as human beings, is that we see ourselves as a protagonist of a story that we continuously tell. We experience the world as a story, with ourselves as the protagonist of that story, with us as the hero or the heroine of that story. And if we accept that as a baseline, kind of as how humans are in the world, I think the rest of it will make a lot more sense. So this is where I'm starting from. I'm starting from the fundamental axiomatic idea that human beings see themselves as a protagonist of a story, and their identity is kind of a mythology of self, and that whatever experience they go into, they experience it like a story, right? And so if we think that learning experiences are experiences, it's not that we design them as stories or that we can design them as stories, is that they are being experienced as stories. It's regardless or not if we consciously create them like that or not, they are always going to be experienced as stories. And really great learning experiences are experienced by the learners as a really intense story, as a story worth remembering. And really, really bad learning experiences that are not really learning experiences because you didn't learn anything, chances are that they are part of the experiencing self. They don't deserve to become part of the remembering self, right? So if we take those ideas as a starting point for thinking about learning experiences, we can start with, okay, if we accept that human beings experience the world as stories, then is there a framework that can help us tell those stories? And yes, there is. It's called the hero's journey. It was developed in 1959 by a guy called Joseph Campbell. It was afterwards simplified by someone named Dan Harmon, who created, not quite as intellectually amazing stories, but still very entertaining. You might know some of them. They are entertaining and nice. But Dan Harmon, what he did was Marty and Rick, or Rick and Marty, I think, is the most known from Dan Harmon of what he put out into the world. But what he did is that he broke down the 16-step hero's journey of Joseph Campbell, and he turned it into an 8-step story circle in a way. So this is what I want to quickly talk about so that we have a same baseline understanding of what that is. So you have a circle basically that has a known side and a non-known side, a dark side, right? And the story always starts in the known world. It brings the protagonist into the darkness and then brings them back into the known world. There's also a journey there and a journey back, right? And it always starts with a protagonist. There, in Lord of the Rings, it's Frodo. In Harry Potter, it's Harry Potter. In Hamlet, it's Hamlet. And the Odyssey, it's Odysseus. In the Bible, it's Jesus. It's a Quran, it's Muhammad. There's always a protagonist, right? The main person. In Star Wars, it's Rey, that is going on this journey. And there's a need. There's a world how it is, and the world how it needs to be, or how it could be, and the world how it is, it's not how it needs to be. So then it is being propelled into having to leave the comfort zone and going to where they haven't been before, right? For Frodo, it's a potential, orc fascism. In Harry Potter, it's dark magic fascism in Harry, etc., right? You get it. So then the protagonist needs to go, right? And that's a really important step. It's going from where they were comfortable, where they were competent, where they knew how the world works, right? Even if they may not have liked it, but they knew how it worked. It goes into not knowing anymore if they are capable, not knowing anymore if it makes sense what they're experiencing, not knowing anymore if they will be able to come back, right? And then they go into the search phase where they are being challenged, where they suddenly have to do things that they've never done before, where they are facing danger, but they survive it, right? It's survivable danger, but it's still really, it's hard on them, and they fail, and they might be smashed to the ground, but then they get up again, right? Until they come to this moment where they suddenly make this main realization, right? Frodo realizes that he has to destroy the ring, even if it destroys him. Harry Potter realizes that he has to die if he wants Voldemort to die as well. And somehow the guy from Notting Hill realizes that even though he doesn't want to be with a superstar, he loves this woman and he needs to ask her if she could stay in London. It works in every story, right? It's that moment of, oh, that's what I have to do now, or that's who I am now. Then it's not only that they need to accept that, but they need to take it and go with it and run with it and say, okay, you're part of me now. You're now who I am, and I'm going to go with you back. There's no good story without a return that leads to a changed world, right? The protagonist never dies. It's what gets you through the Disney movies where it seems like, oh no, Moana is going to die, and then you realize, no, then it would not be a Disney movie if the protagonist dies, so you know you're going to be okay at the end, right? It's that it's no story without a return. It's no story without actually coming back changed, right? Right. Okay. So this is the hero's journey. It's always a journey of transformation, right? It's always a leaving and coming back changed. And I think that is what learning is, right? Learning is this journey of transformation. Learning literally is a transformation of the brain chemistry, right? When we look at it at the molecular neuron level, right? It's where learning, it happens. It's an increased action potential between synapses that allow for the retrieval of information quicker later on. It's literally biological, mechanical transformation that happens. And so this is, I think, how we can think of learning, is that it is a journey of transformation, right? So if we then think of it as a learner's journey of going from where they are to going to where they need to go, we can think of it in that same sense. There needs to be a very clear protagonist, and this protagonist is the learner, and it needs to be rooted in the learner's world. We need to make sure that the learners realize that it's about them, that we see them as who they are in the world that they live in, and that we accept that. And then within that world, there needs to be a very clear gap between how the world is and how it could be, right? This meaningful gap needs to be rooted in the learner's world, and it needs to be motivating enough that it makes sense to go. There needs to be a very clear how it is and how it could be. And the most valuable thing we can give learners at this moment is a question mark, right? A really nice, juicy question mark. Preferably a question mark that comes from them, from an experience that they've had. And we can create this experience through experiential learning exercises, or we can take it from their own world. And then they need to go, right? It's the jump. It's the going into the place where they are not yet comfortable. It needs to be challenging, but it also needs to be safe, right? That's what allows the jump to go. You know it's worth it. It's going to be challenging enough, but you also know that it's going to be physically and psychologically safe. And then we have the challenge, right? And this is what we most traditionally think about training or learning or teaching, right? This is where we provide information. This is where we explore, we experiment, we practice. And I think the most important thing that we can do there is to allow or to create an environment where the learners can fail interestingly, right? Where they can do things and fail, but because it's a safe environment, they can fail interestingly and learn from it and then repeat, right? And through that feedback cycle of exploring, experimenting, failing, and repeating, we create hopefully then this aha moment, this encounter, right? The encounter with the insight. And it can be something that we have somehow tried to steer towards, but it can also be that every learner somehow has their own personal aha moment. It's a very personal experience. It's a very personal thing, right? And then this incorporation, the learners need to make it theirs, right? They need to make it their own. They need to have the possibility to think about how can this skill or this knowledge or this insight be who I am now. I am now someone who is able to do this. I am now someone who understands this. I like this word incorporation because there's the term corpse in there, right? Body, right? You make it part of who you are, your own body. And it's part of the identity now. This is who I am now. And then there needs to come this moment of integration, of somehow strategically thinking about how can I bring this back into my reality? And this is sometimes really difficult when we are in a somehow detached setting in the learning experience, and it's all nice, people are all nice, people are all understanding, and we kind of can feel really safe. But then we go back into the office, or we go back into the classroom, or we go back into where we normally are, and no one cares that we've just learned nonviolent communication, or no one cares that we've just had these great insights about how intercultural competence is this key insight, and no one cares. So we need to spend time in the learning experience thinking also about how can we facilitate that return? how can we help our learners bring this back so that they can have this new normal kind of that is the world where they wanted to go, the world that was attractive to them all along, that was the world worth working for and going towards and working on, right? All right, so this in a nutshell, in a very, very small nutshell, it's not even a walnut nutshell, it's kind of a hazelnut nutshell, is the basic idea of the learner's journey. These are the credits for the look at the noun project. It's amazing. But yes, I can keep this last slide up with the overall thing, or we can go back to seeing each other. But that would be my thoughts on this. I have 91 pages worth more to talk about, which we don't have time for, but I hope it was interesting so far. Yeah. Back to you, Alex.
Yes, thank you, Bastian. You did you did super well with 15 minutes, I'd say. You really covered a lot of ground.